Today's World Insight. An in-depth review of China's recently adopted resolution on comprehensively deepening reform to advance Chinese modernization.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The full text of a resolution on further deepening reform comprehensively to advance China's modernization adopted by the 20th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China at its third plenary session was made public. According to the resolution, the overall objectives of further deepening reform comprehensively are to continue improving and developing the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics and modernize the China system and capacity for governance. The reform tasks in the resolution shall be completed by 2029, the 80th founding anniversary of the People's Republic of China. So, what signals does the resolution send? How China is comprehensively deepening reform and opening wider to the outside world? Let's ask our panelists. For more discussion, joining us in Singapore, Bert Hoffman, professor at the East Asian Institute of the National University of Singapore, former country director of China for the World Bank. In Washington, D.C., Peter Kuznick, professor of history at American University. Last but certainly not least, in Beijing, Zhu Ning, senior partner and head of the China Brunswick Group. Welcome to all of you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, there has been comparison, at least in the literatures and press conferences, comparing the latest, the third plenum of the 20th Party Congress to the earlier, the 11th Party Congress, and later the 18th Party Congress. Now, Mr. Hoffman, I know you have been having some rich experiences of understanding and also personally experiencing different party congresses in China when you were serving in China. Tell us more about your thoughts of these comparisons.
Plenum, I think, was path-breaking in the sense that it was quite comprehensive. We'd been waiting for it for a while, for 10 years, so it was very good to hear what the new plans are for all the ideology and the ideological that we've seen. But it's not the 1978, so a lot is already established. This is continuity, this is further reforms, it is further comprehensively deepening reforms. So I believe the comparison is really fair with the 18th Party Congress, where there were about 300 plus measures approved. This time around, in the decision document, another 300 plus measures approved. Quite comprehensive across the board: economy, social, cultural, international relations, defense, and in that sense, I think the comparison with the 18th Party Congress is appropriate.
Well, I think, as Bert mentioned, I think this is a fairly comprehensive document outlining the future of China's reform and the further opening up. I think there are two things which really caught my attention. I think one is, I think the emphasis on high quality growth and high quality development, and also high quality socialist market economy, which I think is the main theme for the further reform of China. I think China has enjoyed a lot of spectacular growth over the past 3-4 decades, and now people wonder what are the future direction of the next step. So I think this is mapping out some of the directions for that. And the second part of which I think is very important is, I think that it's still continuing the emphasis on China's opening up. I think both in terms of China's opening up to the Western world, but also to the rest of the world, which is the emerging economy. So I think China's increasing connection with Southeast Asia, with the Middle East, with South America. Yeah. I think that's not just building China's future in the economy, but also building a new global order in due course.
Professor Kuznick, you are observing this from afar. Of course, in your country, the United States, it is also been very eventful. But looking at the latest decisions coming out of the third plenum of the Chinese Party Congress, how do you see it is trying to articulate China's role in today's world?
Well, China is changing in many ways. And the emphasis here is on high-tech, the kind of economic development. Previously, China was focusing on more labor-intensive kinds of development, but the Chinese standard of living has gone up, the cost of labor has gone up, and now they're trying to carve out a different place for China in the world. And in order to do that, they've got to be focusing more on domestic reform, raising standards of living, raising the internal market inside China, especially in a world in which there is increasing pressure on China now by countries that are hostile to it and trying to limit China's growth. So it's a very important document at a crucial time.
Let's talk about some of the issues that many from outside China are focusing on. After all, we are presenting our program a lot to our overseas viewers. Professor Hoffman, about the role of the market in the third plenum of the 18th Party Congress, it's very well articulated. Looking at what is being articulated today, how would you do the comparison of descriptions between the two? Meanwhile, how do you see both the continuity of the mindset of reform, while at the same time coming up with new possibilities so that all these pledges and promises could come true?
It's an important question. And frankly, when I read the communique, I was disappointed. This line, the decisive role of the market in allocating resources, it was not in the communique. Definitely, it is in the decisions. So the decision documents, that decisive role is still there. And more so, I think this time around, more meat was put on those bones, on those bare bones of the decisive role. So there's a promise of a role of a law on the private sector. There's the equal treatment of state enterprises and non-state enterprises. There is giving more play to the market line in there. So that's all quite promising. And what is also interesting is that on the state price reforms, which hasn't been moving that much over the past 10 years, frankly, there's now more focus. They say, look, they need to concentrate on core tasks. They need to consider the allocation of capital more appropriately. So I think this signals also that there is some uneasiness with the ever expanding role of state enterprises. And those are two very good signals for the economy.
Mr. Zhu, what are you taking from the latest release of the whole document regarding the role of the market and, of course, the roles of different economic forces in China, including the private enterprises?
Yes, I think it is very important that we pay attention to the wording of the high quality socialistic market economy. So I think on one hand, it is putting a lot of emphasis on, as Bert put it forward, on the market economy, on the decisive role of the market in allocating resources. At the same time, I think it is emphasizing it is a socialistic market economy. So in a way, that's also involving more of the state intervention or state involvement, which I think is very important in curing some of the market failing problems in China's economy right now. And the second part, I think it is very important, especially in the aftermath of COVID. I think China is really striving to beef up its safety net. I mean, both in terms of the social welfare, the medical services, the retirement and the education, and also in terms of the retooling of the existing workforce so that they can better equip themselves with the dynamics nature of the economy. So I think that's very important and encouraging in a way about China is not growing at 8% anymore. I mean, in this gradual slowdown of the China's economic transition, I think the policy would have to transition as well so that the economy is better suited for the future world. Okay. So I think that's one take that I have.
Bert and Ning, since both of you are economists, let me just ask a little bit more on that side. We see there are mixed goals of China. I mean, for a country of 1.4 billion with external environment described earlier by Peter, and also the internal challenges, the economy, social welfare, one could argue there are certainly going to be mixed roles, mixed goals, but how to achieve those goals and whether those goals hand in hand with one another? How do we understand the chemistry among these goals? Would be an interesting question to discover as policies coming out will have an impact on society. And therefore, how focused are we? And also how coordinated these policies are for different goals would be crucial. So Bert, on that, from an economist's perspective, what are you reading?
I think the answer we'll know by 2029. The decision document promises that by then all the reforms will be in place that are currently promised. But clearly, it's the nature of the beast. It's the nature of politics that by now, China at a $12,000 per capita, it's no longer everybody benefits from every reform. And you have to have trade-offs. There are conflicts. There are interest groups that want different things. And a such as the one we just had is actually a great instrument to bring those instruments together, to discuss those trade-offs and then make a decision. The way I see it, China is shaping a society which is unique, i.e. a state-led but sophisticated high-income society. That hasn't happened before. We still don't know whether things succeed. That's why I come back to this role of the market. It is so important because what we do know is that every rich country is a market economy. So to get rich, you have to have the power of the market. But China has a particular way of viewing and using that market, and the question is whether that's going to be successful. The second part, and that hasn't gotten as much attention, say, over the past 45 years, is the social side. That is now coming up a bit more. It's not yet prosperity, but there's more attention to social safety nets, to pension systems, to the social side of reforms. And I believe that is important because, as I said, there won't be just winners, there will also be losers of reforms now going forward.
But Bert, tell me more about, can you give us some examples as what you see in the document actually help you to understand how is China going to do it? For example, about fiscal reform and etc.
Where the document is very concrete. So they talk about strengthening the tax base, of improving the intergovernmental fiscal system, i.e. the transfers from central government to local government, for giving local government some more tax base, and just set a better framework for indebtedness. So that immediately addresses issues at hand, i.e. the fallout of the real estate slump, which has been very bad for local governments. So it's very concrete there, and that's welcome because it's one of the big questions out there in the international financial markets, whether that is going to be solved. I'm now pretty confident that there's enough meat in that document to make that happen, and I expect sort of the concrete reforms to fall into place over the next year or so.
China has an urgent task to increase the domestic demand, to encourage domestic consumption. And therefore, green transformation will be a great key to that. And so you could argue about China's transformation in trade relationships with others, that it's not just an exporter of shoes, of small electronics, but rather moving up the ladder and try to work out a new format of trade with others around the world. But during this process, we see the difficulties of, for example, electronic vehicles, how it is being perceived as overcapacity, and how it is being discussed in China as well for the Chinese market competition. So how do you see China's determination to move up the ladder and increase the domestic demand, but at the same time, the headwinds coming in right now? And that is an interesting relationship to test whether any policies are flexible enough, are applicable enough, and are up to speed enough in order to address some of the domestic and international challenges.
I think, that's probably set aside the where we came from for a moment, I think that there are probably three facts which are very clear. One is China has been growing much faster than any other major economy in its transformation of the traditional automobile industry. So about half of China's total new car sales this year is going to be a new energy vehicle, so electronic or other hybrid forces. So I think this is unprecedented in among all major economies. Two is in light of the slowdown in China's economy and the trouble that China is facing in the real estate sector, new energy vehicle is really providing a much needed new growth engine for China's domestic economy, both from the demand side and from the supply side. So I think that is a very encouraging direction that China has taken. And three, I think China is providing a very competitive market environment. So some of the not so competitive companies are already exiting. So I mean, in terms of overcapacity, this is a dynamic process. Yes, for one moment there could be overcapacity, but then the market will decide which company get to survive and which would have to be waited out. So I think and for China's international relationship with other parts of the world, I think there is some concerns coming from the more developed economies, but then the general consensus from the emerging economies where Bert is seated, Jakarta and Southeast Asia, I think they're actually quite welcoming the more affordable Chinese production of the new energy vehicles. So I think that is another side of the new energy vehicle industry. And China is concerned with, well, some of the companies are not profitable enough to support themselves or to survive. And China is also concerned from a policy perspective about the ramifications of the new energy vehicles. I mean, the disposal of the batteries and the so on and so forth. So I think this is a dynamic process. I don't think any specific areas has been focused or excluded from the decision document, but then I think there has been a lot of mentioning about the emphasis on renewable energy, the emphasis on protection of the environment, the balance between nature and economic growth.
Bert, a related question. For many who are doing business with China, of course, increased domestic consumption would be a very crucial issue. Meanwhile, China's economy is in transformation. Relying more on domestic consumption is the way to go. Do you see in the decision document much literature being devoted to how to encourage domestic consumption, and what might be the workable way to do that?
You mentioned the new quality productive forces. Aside from the three new that is currently playing out, the electric vehicles, wind and solar, the new quality productive force is looking at the future. And that is actually an interesting approach, saying, look, we need to invest now in the research and development for future innovations that will dominate future markets. Quite sophisticated. Haven't seen that much in other countries, that type of thinking. On the demand side, as we discussed, the social security system, strengthening that will have some effects on it. The income distribution, there's quite interesting text on income distribution in the decision document, i.e., especially in the primary sphere, get basically more money and income to households as a share of GDP, and that would increase consumption. But of course, China realizes that if you just increase consumption and nothing else, you will grow less, because no matter how efficient or inefficient, growth comes from investment and technical progress. So that technical progress and innovation has to really be up to speed in order to be able to reduce the investment quote and then increase consumption. Now, bringing that about is indeed, that's a work for a decision document, and it will take 5 years to get that implemented. So a bit more sparks of hope on the consumption side, but it's still a process.
Peter, you see this discussion going on in China about how to make sure there can be sustained policies for the future. On the other hand, there also needs to be very flexible ways of doing things to deal with the current international circumstances, just one of those examples. So how do you see this decision coming out of the third plenum in any way trying to address that?
Several ways. First of all, as my colleagues have stressed, there's been an emphasis on green development, sustainable development, and environmentally friendly development. And that's very important given the current global situation. There's also an emphasis on peaceful development. And China is putting itself forth now as not a new hegemon, but a leader in conjunction with others in what it talks about as a win-win framework.
We have seen the job market for the young people can be a challenge as a result of the many different factors. And also, we are seeing China is a country that there is increasing aging population. While at the same time, when the economy slows down, how to make sure that the poverty alleviation will be a consistent effort being made. All of these and more are really facing China every day. So, Ning, tell us more about what have you learned from the document of the third plenum that actually you see as addressing some of the root problems.
Well, I think first of all, the communique mentioned on several of the key areas that we're talking about. I think the improvement of the medical services to a broader range of the population, the continuation in trying to ensure the success of the poverty elimination and relief programs, and also the helping of the younger part of the generation to regain the tools and skills which are better fitting them to future employment. So I think we probably have to wait for more specific guidelines and actions in the future. But then I think the areas are being outlined pretty cleanly in light of the slowdown in the economy and the turmoil in the local government's financing vehicles. I think whether we will have the fiscal might to push forward for the kind of desired actions, I think that is a question remain to be seen. The second is I think there has been emphasis on trying to improve the efficiency of the fiscal expenditure, which has been a long-standing theme in China's policy. I think how to better harness the balance between fiscal income and fiscal expenditure, how to improve the efficiency of how the money has been spent and the better planning. I think that's also a key that has been mentioned in the communique.
Bert, your thoughts on this?
With the emphasis on the supply side, the emphasis on manufacturing, on modern manufacturing, which is all great, and China's been very good at that, but it doesn't create any jobs. As a matter of fact, we're talking about electric vehicles. Fewer people working in automotives now in China than 5-6 years ago, when nobody had heard of Chinese electric vehicles. So it's a very successful industry, doesn't create any jobs. And there's a hesitancy from the leadership on jobs in finance, jobs in real estate. They think that's sort of not real. Well, frankly, in modern economies, the jobs get created in services. And the good thing about the decision is that there is now more, if you want, more positive language on services as being one of the growth sectors, and that it should be facilitated, because that's what will create the jobs of the future. If you look at a modern electric vehicle plant, it's all robots. So the jobs won't come from there. So, and second, we already mentioned it, the social welfare system, the social safety net is important. It's now encouraged to also expand it to migrant workers, which is an important part of the workforce. In times of transition, in times of major changes, both in industries as well as international tensions, you need such a safety net to make change happen. So again, a positive one for, I think, the employment situation. Thanks.
All right. And finally, before we go, final words from every one of you about what needs to be watched in the next couple of months.
You know, unlike my colleagues, I'm not an economist, and so I can't answer it in terms of the economic direction, but I see China's role on the world stage as being absolutely crucial.
Well, I think I would probably look at one minor area, which is the further opening up of China's economy. So China has been wavering unilaterally the visa requirement for many of the countries from Europe and the Middle East and Southeast Asia. And we're seeing more and more foreign business people and tourists coming to China over the past 6 months or so. So I think that is very encouraging in the aftermath of COVID, that China is reintegrating into the rest of the world. I think to see is to believe. I think welcoming more foreigners back to China, I think is really helpful, and I think that's also going to be paving the ways for many of the reforms being mentioned or emphasized in the communique and the document decision.
Professor Hoffman, what are you going to watch in the next couple of months to understand the real essence of the third plenum?
We haven't talked about it much, but there's language on the hukou system that is important to see whether indeed there is now this move towards providing all the social services, all the urban social services to migrant workers. That would be a great progress. And as part of the land market and the land rights of migrants, how are they going to be implemented? Technical issue, but important for people that move to the city or don't move to the city because they are afraid to lose their land rights. The end of the month, there is a Politburo meeting, and that's where I think some of the short measures that are implied in the decision document are going to see the light of day.
All right.
Thanks.
A lot to watch. Every topic we touch on actually worth several hours real discussion, but our time is really limited. I'm looking forward to continuing this kind of discussion for the near future. Bert Hoffman, Peter Kusnik, last but not least, Zhu Ning. Thank you so much for joining us. Our time is limited. I really hope to continue our conversation like this in the near future. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of my team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.